All right, let's get into 2021 now, Corey. And really, the names in the top four here for you are the names that went in the top four, but a little bit different order. Matty Beniers at number one, Luke Hughes at number two, in a tier of kind of their own in the bubble elite NHL and NHL All Star tier for you. How did you kind of parse that against Owen Power and Mason McTavish, and especially Hughes so new into the NHL as opposed to Power a little more track record?
Right, if it doesn't translate, egg will be on my face a year from now, given that Owen Power looks like a star and just got paid like a star. But with Hughes, and I just think the traits are just off the chart with how good a skater is at that size, and I think he's gonna get plenty of power play opportunity, and I think he's got that offensive ability to produce in the NHL right away. I think it will translate right away in a significant way, but obviously if it doesn't, that ranking will look extremely aggressive. But I think those four guys, I think you really can argue those four guys in any order. Maybe McTavish can't get up to one reasonably at this stage, but I think you can put those four guys in almost any order, and I wouldn't quibble too much.
Yeah, and McTavish a little bit of a validation. He was kind of the late rising name in that class. It felt like after the U18 Worlds, his star really ticked up. So a little bit of validation there for him to be in that group. Another guy who ticked up after that U18 Worlds, and clearly not high enough. Wyatt Johnson ends up going, I believe, 23rd in this class. You have him in a tier of his own at number 5 in this one on the redraft.
And what's important to remember with McTavish, but especially with Wyatt Johnston, was that was the COVID draft. That was the year of the stops and the starts, and the OHL doesn't play, and the WHL plays like their bubble season, and the Q pauses, the leagues in Europe take mid-year pauses. It was a really chaotic year to scout players. And Mason McTavish plays his year in the Swiss second-tier pro league, and then he goes to the U18s. And Wyatt Johnson doesn't play at all. That U18 Worlds where he doesn't get power play time, despite being an offensive guy, a power play guy coming up through the years, including at the U17 Challenge, including with Windsor as an underage player. He doesn't get that offensive opportunity with Team Canada, and his only hockey he plays all season. And that was just such an interesting draft to look back on, given that context. And seeing what Wyatt Johnson ultimately ended up becoming, which it looks like an extremely important young player right now for the Dallas Stars' future. A guy with elite, in my opinion, offensive hockey sense and creativity, and somebody who I expect will put up a lot of points in the NHL.
We've heard so much in the past couple of years about the Dallas draft that landed them Miro Heiskanen, Jason Robertson, and Jake Ottinger. In this 2021 class, they already have two guys in your top 10 here, because not only is Johnson at 5, Logan Stankoven is clocking in at 9 for you. And really, he's one of 2 second-round guys who worked their way into the top 10 here for you. Not Matthew Nyes is at number 8, Stankoven's at number 9. They surpass kind of Dylan Genther, Cole Sillinger, in your rankings in a different tier even from those guys here, a half a tier for you. I thought that placement was really interesting to see those second rounders work up into the top 10.
Sure, and obviously they haven't played a ton of pro hockey. I mean, Nyes played a little bit towards the end of the season. So there's always that calculation you have to make about what you've seen from Sillinger as a pro, for example. Even though there was a tough year last year, he's still only a teenager in pro hockey. So you got to think about more projection, looking at the traits, the body, the skating, the skill, thinking about what he'll be in 3-5 years. But comparing that to guys like Logan Stankoven and Matt Nyes, and I think Logan Stankoven, despite his diminutive frame, for me, every time I've watched him for years now, stands out. He is an impactful small player with outstanding skating and offensive skills and competitiveness. And he's a guy who I think would have made the Dallas Stars roster if they didn't have the depth chart and the cap situation they had right now. His camp was that good. And so I don't have much reservations putting him there. Like I understand, especially if you compare it to Dylan Ganther, who was a top 10 pick, Western League player. You can quibble hey, but I don't know. I've watched both of those players play in the Western League. I have watched them be on Team Canada together, and I would say Stankoven has been just as good, if times not better. So I understand there's a massive size difference there, but I think Stankoven skates better. I think he competes better. So I don't think it's unreasonable to at least suggest they're close. Maybe you prefer one or the other. Yeah. And maybe comparing Matt Nyes to Sillinger, I see the big body, average skating comparison there. I think Nyes is bigger, and And I think his compete is high. Doesn't have the killer in him that Sillinger has, but I think his compete is really good. He's excellent in the high percentage areas. And I just think his game's really going to translate, even though I know the first game or two with Toronto, I don't think he's stood out, but I think he's going to be just fine in the NHL.
Yeah. When we were in the 2022 segment, you kind of talked about, not getting fooled by training camp and wanting to see a little bit longer of a run before you elevated some of these guys from the second round and beyond up really, really high. And I think JJ Moser is a great example of, he is now a guy who has a full year and a half under his belt here. He was in the NHL for half the season after he was drafted. He plays the full year last year, puts up 30 points on the blue line for Arizona. And he has now clearly cleared that bar for you as checking in. I think he's at number 16 for you.
Right. And he was drafted as a re-entry eligible when Arizona took him out of the Swiss League. Comes into the American League and is excellent right away, gets to the NHL. And there are some people who will look at his performance and wonder, is this a guy who is just playing a lot because Arizona doesn't have a great team? And I get that argument to an extent, but you still have to produce when you get those opportunities. And if you don't, those minutes will be taken away from you. So I don't, JJ Moser's average size, don't think his skating's amazing. So I don't, despite his great numbers early on in the NHL career, I don't look at this guy who's going to be a true top pair guy when Arizona's trying to win. You compare his toolkit to, say, Dmitry Simashev. Dmitry Simashev looks the part more of a premier defenseman in the NHL. But I think JJ Moser is super smart. He competes well, and he looks like a guy who could be a really nice second pair guy when Arizona is trying to win. And getting that guy in the late second round is a massive win.
Absolutely. Another guy, this guy was kind of the story of that draft at the time of it, of the wow, did you see this coming? Tyler Boucher at the time goes to Ottawa. I believe he was the 10th pick. He clocks in for you at number 31 here. So it is a little bit of the anticipated spot in the redraft. But what have you thought of Boucher's arc since he was drafted?
Well, I thought Boucher was a good player when they drafted him, and I've still maintained ever since they drafted him that he is a good to, if not at times, looks like a very good player. His health has been a major issue. I think if he was consistently healthy, he could be a little bit higher on this ranking. But he's a good skater. He has skill, extremely physical and competitive, can score goals. I don't think he's a natural offensive guy, but I think there is secondary NHL offense in his game. I think with Boucher, they chased a player type when they took him. They wanted to get the super physical winger who would add a particular element to their lineup, which I understood. And I said at the time, and I maintain now, if you would have taken that player at 20, no issues. Even at 17 or whatever, a little high, but it would have been okay. I just thought where they went to go get him at 10, it was a little aggressive. At 10th overall, that's the kind of area in the draft where you need to get a top 6 forward. He needs to be a legit high in the lineup guy for you because there's only so few of those guys in a draft, and they usually all go in the top 10 to 15 picks. But then once you get past that group, you kind of pick your flavor a little bit.
And of course, Ottawa's argument would have been they didn't have the 17th pick. They didn't have the 20th pick. They had the 10th pick, and they liked the guy, right?
Yep, and I understand that argument. You got to take the guys you like, but I just felt it was a little aggressive for the player, but while still admitting then and now he is a good hockey player.